patient's surgery on the second day, but the surgeon still couldn't operate the surgical instruments. Even though he had practiced a dozen times, he always messed up the experimental sutures. Little Hay on the side couldn't bear to watch anymore. Pleading with the chief to give the patient a chance at life, it turned out that this was the hospital's latest introduced surgical instrument kit, capable of precisely performing surgeries that ordinary people couldn't, and with minimal harm to the patient. It's hailed as the hand of God, and just the next day, the first surgery using this instrument would be liver strained in its entirety. The original operator turned out to be Little Hay. In order to familiarize himself with the instrument, he had been diligently practicing for a full 2 years. Once the surgery succeeded, he would also be written into the annals of medical history with such a great opportunity to shine. How could Dr. Bell, as the head of surgery, possibly let others have it? So he went to the patient's room and subtly hinted that tomorrow's surgeon was a black man, and only a second-year resident at the hospital. As an investor in the hospital, the patient immediately expressed dissatisfaction, unwilling to entrust his life to a black man, demanding that Dr. Bell personally perform the surgery. If the hospital disagreed, he would refuse the surgery. Immediately after, Dr. Bell found Little Hay and conveyed the patient's demand. Little Hay's face was full of disbelief. Although Dr. Bell was the head of surgery at the hospital, he was well aware that Dr. Bell had long been suffering from Parkinson's disease, having sent patients away directly from the operating table more than once. But Dr. Bell didn't care, because this was the most advanced technology in the world, rumored to eliminate all human errors. Little Hay wanted to argue further.
Oh, then I'm afraid you'll be heading back to Lucia.
It turns out Little Hay's visa is about to expire. For a successful renewal, recommendation from Dr. Bell, as the chief physician, is crucial. Faced with such a blatant threat, Little Hay had no choice. He could only teach Dr. Bell how to operate the machine overnight. But such a complex machine couldn't just be mastered at once. Even after practicing a dozen times, Dr. Bell still made a mess of it every time. In desperation, Little Hay advised Dr. Bell to let go. After all, he was the hospital's main financial backer. But Dr. Bell remained unmoved, firmly tossing out another ultimatum.
Round 11.
As expected, the outcome was no different, ending once again with the pulverization of the plum's body.
Oh, for crying out loud!
But to everyone's surprise, the surgery proceeded smoothly as usual the next day, with Dr. Bell still leading the operation. At this moment, the doctors gathered in front of a big screen, fully aware of Dr. Bell's notorious reputation, eagerly anticipating his embarrassment. However, as the surgery progressed, they were astonished to find that everything was going unusually well. Jumbo couldn't understand it. How could Dr. Bell, who had Parkinson's, accomplish this? With doubts lingering, Jumbo rushed to the operating room, only to discover that Dr. Bell was merely putting on a show in front of the camera, while Little Hay was the one actually operating the instruments. It had to be said that Dr. Bell, who managed to rise to the position of chief, indeed had some skill, but luck couldn't always be on his side. Next, the patient just wanted to have a lip balm removed, but with one tremor of the hand, the operating room was set ablaze. The son died after failed resuscitation efforts, but the father wasn't sad at all. Instead, he showed a relieved smile. Now the doctors were completely baffled. It turns out that the person lying on the hospital bed wasn't his son at all. Just moments ago, a bus overturned, and a large number of casualties were brought to the hospital. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts and layoffs, the hospital had reassigned experienced triage nurses. The new nurse had just graduated, and had never seen such a chaotic situation before. The emergency room was in complete disarray in an instant. Fortunately, the doctors arrived on time, and managed to slightly ease the situation. Coincidentally, at this moment, a boy walked into the hospital, claiming he fell while skateboarding, likely hitting his head. However, to the triage nurse, since the boy could walk and talk, he probably didn't have any serious injuries, so she asked the boy to wait. Without even giving him an identification bracelet, she found an empty bed for the boy, and he began his long wait. Suddenly, a back cart passed by, accidentally dropping a package. The boy wanted to shout out, but then he felt a severe headache, and passed out. A passing nurse kindly picked up the package for him.
Excuse me. This isn't mine.
Meanwhile, the boy's phone started ringing, but just as he checked the message, he was hit by a dizzy spell. His dropped phone was kicked away by a passerby. Half an hour passed, and Senka finally noticed the unconscious boy. With a touch, he felt the boy's weak pulse.
Let's get this guy to acute now!
At this moment, the boy's left pupil had dilated, and preliminary assessment suggested a cerebral hemorrhage. However, due to the lack of an identification bracelet, the doctors were unaware of the boy's condition, and the triage nurse's mind was blanked, constantly explaining that it was not intentional.
Find his name.
The nurse finally noticed the backpack beside the bed and successfully found the A card, but in her nervousness, she didn't look at the photo. However, just then, the monitor started alarming. Despite Senka starting resuscitation immediately, it was too late, and the boy eventually passed away.
He had a head injury. He should be on concussion protocol. In urgent.
With brain bleeds, there aren't always symptoms at first.
The most urgent task was to quickly contact the boy's family. But when the father entered the hospital room, wanting to take a last look at his son, he was surprised to find that the person lying on the hospital bed was not his son at all. Confused, Jian-Guo could only call the police and register the boy's information. Due to the fatality, the hospital was forced to bring back the original triage nurse. In no time, the emergency room was back in order, and while cleaning up, the old nurse found an unclaimed phone. Jian-Guo then realized that this might be the deceased boy's. With a trembling heart, he dialed the emergency contact number and informed the boy's family of the situation. However, at the same time, on the other side, a newlywed couple arrived at the hospital. The husband was diagnosed with testicular cancer. However, in a cost-saving measure, the hospital had the lead surgeon perform 3 surgeries simultaneously. Overwhelmed, the surgeon accidentally removed the husband's healthy testicle. The man just wanted to remove an ingrown toenail, but the hospital insisted on giving him an MRI. The attending physician was baffled. What kind of MRI was needed to remove an ingrown toenail? However, just as the man was about to enter the MRI machine, the head nurse burst in. She carefully examined the man's medical records and noticed something peculiar about his body.
Mr. Reynolds, do you know how an MRI works? It has incredibly powerful magnets that will rip anything metal out of your body.
The man instinctively covered his private area. Only then did Curly learn that the patient had undergone a penile implant, and the implant was made of metal. The man was terrified, shouting for the doctor to turn off the machine. It turned out that the hospital, in order to increase revenue, had hired a PR manager named Curly. No matter what illness you come to the hospital for, you have to undergo tests first. Anyway, it's all paid for by medical insurance. Meanwhile, on the other side, hospital attendant Xiao Mei collapsed on the ground. She was luckily discovered by Senga and Jian-Guo passing by. Just as the two were helping Xiao Mei with her examination, Curly walked in, insisting on checking Xiao Mei's insurance first. Xiao Mei immediately claimed to be fine and said she didn't need an examination. But as soon as she took a few steps, she collapsed again on the ground. It was initially suspected to be a heart blockage. Luckily, Jian-Guo performed a timely heart puncture and barely saved her life. Just as everyone was preparing for an MRI to properly diagnose Xiao Mei's condition, Curly walked in once again.
She's uninsured.
Curly found through investigation that Xiao Mei was an undocumented immigrant, but Jian-Guo didn't care. In the eyes of a doctor, nationality doesn't matter. Now, Xiao Mei has been diagnosed with malignant tumors. Without timely treatment, she could die at any moment.
No more tests. No more treatment on our dying. This hospital isn't a charity.
In no time, Curly reported the situation to the hospital director. However, as law clearly states that critically ill patients cannot be expelled from the hospital, but considering Xiao Mei's condition, even if everything goes smoothly, it will cost the hospital $500,000. And if the post-operative recovery is poor, it will cost the hospital at least $2 million. With no other options, the hospital director had to call the immigration office and attempt to forcibly take Xiao Mei away and deport her. But Jian-Guo and Senga stood in their way, trying to hold back the immigration officers while getting Xiao Mei into the operating room and arranging surgery immediately. Even the immigration officers couldn't forcibly remove the patient from the operating room. Soon, Xiao Mei successfully underwent surgery, and the hospital director was left with no choice. At this moment, all he could do was pray for Xiao Mei's post-operative recovery. As long as she could walk to the door, it would only cost the hospital $500,000. However, even with all her efforts, Xiao Mei couldn't get out of bed. Jian-Guo and Senga didn't care about all that, as long as the patient was alive and well. But what they didn't know was the hospital director would massively cut the hospital's budget because of this. Even the experienced triage nurses were forced to be laid off. Then, a massive car accident occurred, and the entire emergency room instantly turned into chaos. The man came to the hospital for treatment, but ended up making the doctors question life itself. Inside the man's intestines, a whole bottle of nutritional supplement was stuck, and it was the family-sized one sold in supermarkets. While Senga was astonished by the discovery, the other doctors seemed unfazed, as if they were already accustomed to such surprises.
Time to educate him on both the frequency and creative nature of these situations.
Yes.
Senga only learned then that over the past 3 years of the pandemic, the man had inserted various items into his body, from electric toothbrushes to cell phones to light bulbs. But unlike the small items before, this foreign object was too large. Senga suggested surgery to remove it, but his suggestion was immediately vetoed by Jian-Guo.
We'll be trying several non-surgical methods first, Doctor.
With no other options left, Senga had to attempt to get the man to return to his senses and understand why he did what he did. As a Harvard graduate, Senga couldn't fathom why the man would engage in such behavior, especially upon learning that he was a university professor.
You know, I feel like you're not really present, Dr. Pravesh, like your mind is open.
But Senga paid no heed and determinedly pulled the bottle out. The man was relieved beyond words. However, at that moment, Senga noticed something unusual.
Queen start her day with or without her crown.
With.
Through a cord scan, it was quickly confirmed that a bottle cap was lodged deep in the man's intestine and required urgent surgical removal. Reluctantly, Senga had to inform the attending physician to schedule surgery for the man as soon as possible. However, to Senga's surprise, the man complained about him immediately after the surgery, criticizing today's younger generation for lacking focus on highly talented individuals like a Harvard graduate.
I will confess, I was nervous. It was the first time that
you had extracted an object from the colon of an adult male.
Surprisingly, the man wasn't angry. Instead, he simply advised Senga to be more careful next time. Senga couldn't understand why there needed to be a next time at all. An 8-year-old boy was on the brink of death. He was finally brought to the hospital. However, the hospital refused treatment and demanded an ambulance to transfer him to another hospital. The emergency responders accompanying the ambulance were bewildered, not understanding why the hospital was behaving this way. It turns out, just moments ago, the entire hospital experienced a sudden and inexplicable power outage, rendering all operating rooms inoperable. But the boy's condition was critical, and waiting for another hospital was out of the question. As a doctor, Zhang couldn't stand by and watch someone die. Despite opposition from the triage nurse, he welcomed the boy in for preliminary examination. The boy was found to have severe intra-abdominal bleeding, requiring immediate thoracotomy to relieve pressure. However, due to the massive power outage, there were no functioning elevators, and it would take the surgical team another 10 minutes to arrive. Left with no choice, Jian Guo, as an internist, made the decision to perform emergency thoracotomy on the boy to relieve the pressure.
Right now, this isn't your fault, but if you cut and he dies, it's on you. Don't risk it.
But every second of waiting weakened the boy's life. Jiang had no choice but to proceed with the surgery despite the risks. Fortunately, he found the right spot, and the surgical team arrived just in time. Although the pressure in the boy's chest was relieved, the urgent task was to find a usable operating room to remove the bullet from his abdomen. With the backup generator about to fail, there were no available operating rooms and no sterile environment. Even if surgery were performed, the boy would be doomed. Since there was none, they decided to create one. Jiang quickly found an empty room on the ground floor and set it up within minutes. He then called for a standby fire truck to adjust its angle, illuminating the entire room with his headlights. The next moment, the boy was wheeled in, and everyone got to work without hesitation. Soon after, the hospital director rushed over. He had clearly ordered no more admissions. Confused, he wondered if these people had lost their minds to defy his orders. Jiang hurriedly explained that without immediate surgery, the boy wouldn't survive. Thankfully, being a doctor himself, the director understood the gravity of the situation and temporarily suppressed his anger. Meanwhile, the IT department finally uncovered the truth. The blackout wasn't caused by a storm, but by someone hacking into the hospital system. What astonished everyone was that the hacker's IP address originated from within the hospital. However, due to the hospital's robust system, the IT department was powerless. Soon, a girl with kidney failure caught Jimei's attention. She was always on her phone, seemingly not chatting. From her mother, Jimei learned that due to illness and death, the girl had to drop out of MIT to ease the financial burden. She often wrote code for others. The truth emerged: the entire hospital blackout was caused by this girl. Cornered, she admitted everything. The long-standing medical bills had drained her already struggling family financially, forcing her out of college. Now, all she wanted was to hack into the hospital's billing system to clear her debts. Ironically, she hadn't realized the extent of her actions.
Your cyber attack is responsible for this entire power outage.
Countless patients have suffered through the night because of your actions. The losses incurred by the entire hospital are astronomical. The girl was taken aback. She had only targeted the hospital's billing system to clear her own debts. Without delay, she took out her computer and attempted to restore the hospital's power supply outside the ward. Her mother pleaded incessantly on her behalf. Their already troubled family couldn't bear another blow, but pleading worked in such a major crisis. Soon, the girl produced a backup of the hospital's system. With it, she quickly repaired the hospital's system once connected to the mainframe. Seeing the girl truly acknowledging her mistake and realizing that despite the danger, no lives were lost under the collective fear of the hospital staff, Jimei felt compassion just then. Her boyfriend Zhang arrived. The two immediately decided to approach the hospital director together, attempting to intercede for the girl. After all, if investigations were to ensue, the hospital's outdated computer system and imperfect backup generators wouldn't reflect well on the director either. As expected, the director compromised. China's richest man simply had his appendix removed, yet he insisted on going to the best hospital in the United States. However, he was dissatisfied with the hospital room number.
1664 166 is the number, which sounds like 166, which means one road to death.
The richest man said that if he stayed in a room like this, the surgery definitely wouldn't go smoothly. He even hinted that he might die on the operating table. Suddenly, he called the nurse back and said he would immediately check online about the standards of hospitals in China.
Don't tell me about numbers. I'll run a search engine, 100 server farms, and the world's biggest e-commerce website in the world.
To the surprise of the richest man, he found out that all the hospital rooms faced south. Mr. Ma firmly believed that facing north represented good health. With no other options, the nurse had to call experienced Jiamei for support. Upon learning that Mr. Ma's lucky number was 3, and that all his phone numbers ended with 3,333, Jiamei decisively modified a room number with sticky notes. This maneuver perfectly suited Mr. Ma's taste, and he praised Jiamei for being so resourceful. He happily moved into the room, unaware that the chief surgeon about to operate on him, Dr. Bell, had developed Parkinson's disease early in middle age. Despite being once the best surgeon, he had sent numerous patients away directly from the operating table due to his condition. However, perhaps due to Mr. Ma's extraordinary abilities or some divine intervention, Dr. Bell miraculously completed Mr. Ma's surgery flawlessly this time, just as he was about to hold a press conference to announce to the public that Mr. Ma had received the best treatment in the United States. Another problem arose on Mr. Ma's side. Moments after returning to his room, he began vomiting blood uncontrollably. Seeing the critical situation, the hospital had no choice but to rush Mr. Ma back to the operating room. However, upon reopening Mr. Ma's chest. Everyone was astonished to find that besides Parkinson's, Dr. Bell also suffered from severe overconfidence during the previous surgery. His assistant had suggested tying off Mr. Ma's inferior mesenteric artery to prevent unnecessary bleeding during appendix removal, but Dr. Bell had arrogantly dismissed the idea.
Necessary. That's a backup in case of error. This is flawed.
It turned out that in order to ensure the surgery went perfectly, Dr. Bell had resorted to taking benzodiazepines before the operation. While these drugs helped with his tremors, their side effect was an extreme sense of overconfidence. Seeing the chief surgeon so adamant, the assistant felt it wasn't appropriate to say much more. Fortunately, the issue was discovered in time, and two highly professional doctors swiftly cleaned up the mess left by Dr. Bell. Just then, Dr. Bell, alerted by the notification, hurriedly arrived at the operating room.
How many people have to die before you turn your scrubs, huh? Doesn't matter how great you were, it's how great you are. Here and now. You don't have it anymore. Time to retire.
As the director of surgery at the hospital, Dr. Cabell couldn't tolerate insubordination from his subordinates. He immediately called out the doctor who had been yelling at him.
Another tour of duty or another hospital. That's your future. The board will be revoking your privileges at Chastain.
In this hospital, Dr. Cabell was akin to an emperor, not tolerating any challenge to his authority. Soon after, when Mark woke up, Cabell took credit for all the success, attributing it to other medical issues within Mark's body that he had addressed proactively. If it had been someone else, Mark might have met his ancestor sooner. Mark, feeling grateful, immediately pulled out a 24Ks gold wristwatch to express his gratitude. However, just as the matter with the Chinese tycoon had settled, Cabell shifted his focus to Xiaohei. The hospital had recently introduced the most advanced remote surgery system, poised to elevate surgical standards to new heights. However, it was Xiaohei who had been operating it. Cabell couldn't allow the honor and accolades to shine on anyone else's head.
It's big. And getting bigger.
The man had just slept and didn't want to wake up. His left leg was unexpectedly twice as swollen as his right leg. He hurried to the hospital. As a famous baseball player, he was deeply concerned that his leg injury might prevent him from participating in the game. The doctor's preliminary diagnosis was deep vein thrombosis, which might require surgery. But the immediate concern was to determine the cause of the thrombosis. They had to wait for the results of the tests. Unexpectedly, as everyone was about to leave, the man lying on the hospital bed caught a glimpse of Nurse Jiamei at the door. It turned out that the children from the pediatrics department had learned that a big star was hospitalized and all wanted autographs. The man readily agreed to give them some jerseys and photos, using the excuse of having Jiamei distribute them. He managed to get Jiamei's phone number. To Jiamei's surprise, the man clearly had other intentions. The next moment, he sent a photo of his swollen leg. Speechless, Jiamei was truly speechless. There were always some arrogant patients who would send her all sorts of messy photos, and this scene happened to be witnessed by Zhang Guo, her boyfriend. "I'm working hard to help you get better, and you're thinking about my wife," he angrily exclaimed as he immediately found the celebrity. However, there was another woman in the room. Zhang Guo was stunned. Wasn't this a classic case of coveting what one couldn't have? But when Zhang Guo identified himself and stated his purpose, the celebrity didn't even care. He even said that as long as he wasn't married, he still had a chance. However, just as the two were about to confront each other, the celebrity suddenly had difficulty breathing. Shortly after, the monitor started beeping. Luckily, Zhang Guo was right there. Based on his experience, he suspected that the man had pulmonary embolism and needed blood tests. Considering the man's previous actions, Zhang Guo proceeded with the necessary procedures.
Put him on oxygen and get him to sleep.
You ignore that.
So, it turns out even tough guys aren't immune to pain. With the cord skin results coming out quickly, it was finally confirmed that the blood clot in his leg had migrated to his chest. The results of the leg test also came out, showing that the left leg's iliac vein was under pressure, leading to the formation of the clot. This condition required immediate surgery. If they chose medication instead, there was a risk that if a man got hit by a baseball during the game, even divine intervention couldn't control the bleeding. But with surgery, the recovery time would be quite long. When it came down to life versus the game, anyone would choose the former. Besides, the man was already 38 years old, and this was his last season he could compete. It seems karma for coveting someone else's woman really came quickly. The twin sister, who was just born prematurely, was diagnosed with congenital heart malformation, but in the operating room, as soon as the doctor opened her chest, the next moment the power went out unexpectedly. According to hospital regulations, the surgery had to be stopped immediately. Otherwise, if something went wrong, everyone present would be held responsible. But if they closed her chest now, it would be like condemning the sister to death.
Is there anyone here who is more concerned with their career than saving Mabel's life? Quick show of hands.
Everyone looked at each other, their expressions revealing determination. Not a single person left. Although the hospital's backup generator quickly started, due to years of neglect, the generator could only barely sustain for 40 minutes. They couldn't even finish a third of the surgery. Now they were truly racing against death. Every second felt especially precious. Meanwhile, the hospital outside was already in chaos. Once the hospital lost power completely and the ventilators were no longer functional, many critically ill patients would be in jeopardy. The immediate priority was to quickly transfer the critically ill patients to other hospitals. But this woman refused to leave. No matter what, she was the mother of the premature twins. Her newborn daughter was fighting for her life in the operating room. How could she leave so easily? The third brother objected. saying that a woman could use a portable oxygen tank, and insisted on giving the spot to the other side, where the patient who had been unconscious due to a car accident.
Belle will lose his mind. That Barb coma has already billed $250,000.
But at a time like this, who could spare a thought for that? Seeing the determination of the third brother and his assurance to take responsibility, the nurse reluctantly left. As every second passed, the hospital's generator finally gave out, plunging the entire operating room into darkness. But then, dozens of flashlights lit up, illuminating the path for the baby girl to survive. With the extracorporeal circulation machine unusable, a nurse manually supported the baby. With everyone's help, the baby girl eventually endured the surgery bravely. Meanwhile, the hospital finally restored power.
These babies should have won.
It was as if death was playing a cruel joke on everyone. At that moment, Little Black noticed his brother crying incessantly beside him. Their father explained that ever since their sister was taken into the operating room, their brother had been crying non-stop. Despite trying everything, they couldn't calm him down. It was then that Little Black had an idea.
They don't know an existence without the touch of the other.
Then, Little Black gently placed his sister beside his brother. Soon enough, a miracle occurred. The moment his brother's hand touched his sister, he finally stopped crying and soon drifted into a deep sleep. All the efforts of that night were worth it. But how could such a large hospital just shut down with a power outage? The newlyweds, only married for a week, received shocking news from the hospital. The doctor informed the couple that the husband's one testicle had suffered severe atrophy, and immediate removal was necessary. The good news was that the remaining one was still functional, and the wife didn't oppose the decision.
Well, can't be worse than the pair. They're hideous. Maybe less is more.
To avoid the man feeling out of place, the doctor suggested implanting prosthetic testicles for him.
Gonna get you a bright, shiny new
As the man chose the largest one, the doctor strongly opposed, explaining that having one significantly larger than the other could affect the body's balance.
You'd be drifting to the left. You know, I have an idea. Why don't I just get like a triple D implant, but only in my right boob? That way we'd always be moving towards each other.
The hospital's cost-cutting measures led to a grave mistake. The surgeon was tasked with performing 2 surgeries at once, meaning Dr. Bell had to oversee 2 resident surgeons, while one patient was under anesthesia. Dr. Xiaohei was preparing to remove the atrophied testicle. However, the assistant for the other surgery, after working continuously for 30 hours without rest, fell asleep during the operation, toppling over and accidentally puncturing the patient's blood vessel. Dr. Bell alone couldn't control the patient's severe bleeding, so Dr. Xiaohei was called in to assist. Luckily, the patient's condition stabilized, and Dr. Xiaohei swiftly went to support Dr. Bell's surgery. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. The patient's bleeding was successfully controlled, and the collapsed doctor suffered no major injuries. But as Dr. Xiaohei prepared to remove the testicle after disinfecting, he received another urgent notification. A patient had a ruptured aneurysm and needed immediate surgery, and Dr. Xiaohei was the only available surgeon. Once again, he rushed to assist the patient. After everything was finally settled, Dr. Xiaohei had time to perform the testicle removal. But due to the delays and confusion, the patient had been under anesthesia for too long, and the previous markings were accidentally wiped away during disinfection. Dr. Xiaohei couldn't confirm which testicle to remove and proceeded with the surgery without certainty. Fortunately, there were no complications, and all 3 patients were out of danger. Unfortunately, the newlywed couple faced a tragic outcome. Due to Dr. Xiaohei's oversight, the husband's healthy testicle was mistakenly removed, meaning he would never be a fully functional man again. The hospital held an accountability meeting immediately, seeking to blame Dr. Xiaohei. Fortunately, Dr. Bell intervened, acknowledging his own role in insisting on 3 simultaneous surgeries. Training a competent doctor is no easy task, and Dr. Xiaohei was ultimately spared from severe consequences. Thanks to Dr. Bell's sincere apology, the newlywed couple didn't protest, but the hospital faced another hefty compensation demand. Each time the hospital attempted to cut costs, it resulted in patient incidents that forced interruptions. Perhaps this was the reality of Western medicine, effective in many cases, but with its flaws. Stratton Army hopes for the rise of traditional Chinese medicine, hoping to prevent tragedies like this, or at least reduce their frequency. The intern doctor finally managed to insert the needle into the vein correctly, but due to excessive excitement, they unexpectedly pulled out the needle directly.
You have to remove the tourniquet first before you withdraw.
San, the third brother, was truly bewildered. He couldn't understand. However, what happened next completely overturned San's worldview. The intern doctor claimed they were skilled at diagnosis, but not adept at nursing tasks. So, San brought them to Grandpa's place and had them line up to listen to Grandpa's heartbeat. The first to step forward, supposedly the top of their class, seemed completely dismissive of San.
You clearly hear a diastolic rumble with an opening snap, which is indicative of mitral stenosis secondary to rheumatic heart disease.
Actually, I hear a crescendo, decrescendo, systolic ejection murmur radiating to the carotids with soft S2 and precordial.
Only the Chinese international student looked helpless. He couldn't hear any abnormalities in the patient's heartbeat. At this point, Grandpa couldn't hold back any longer. I think I'm here for gallbladder surgery. He said, yes, your heart is very healthy. This teacher couldn't be more wrong. It was a real slap in the face. As doctors, they were destined to make certain mistakes. Meanwhile, while a nurse was fetching medication, she found a girl who had fainted in the pharmacy. Checking her wristband, They discovered she had diabetes due to not receiving insulin on time. She was suspected to have diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, she was severely dehydrated and needed urgent intubation, or her life would be in grave danger. Without hesitation, Sen ordered the intern doctors to fetch the central line, repeatedly reminding them to ask for help from the nurses. However, the arrogant top student completely disregarded him and just grabbed something according to their own instincts.
Like he said, get a nurse.
I got it.
But what they grabbed was a double lumen catheter.
This is a Foley catheter kit. This is for urine. I told you that. But no.
However, the girl's heart rate was too high, and there was no time to fetch additional equipment. They had to attempt an external jugular vein injection as a precaution. While Little Black prepared for the worst-case scenario, if the injection couldn't be administered in the neck, they would have to drill into the shin bone and inject directly into the marrow. Fortunately, Jianmei was experienced enough to barely save the patient's life. Then, they transferred the patient away. As for C, the top student, he was dumbfounded. He entered medicine to heal and save lives, but after being at the top for so long, he thought he couldn't make mistakes. But, on his first day of internship, he nearly caused a patient's death due to his error. The patient now had to undergo limb abandonment. Once this procedure began, the patient might never recover. In an instant, the boy was overwhelmed with deep self-blame. Indeed, the medical profession is one where mistakes cannot be made. Otherwise, it's the patient's health or even life that's sacrificed. So I hope you can learn from this experience and avoid making bigger mistakes in the future. Fortunately, Jianmei was competent, and the patient was safe. However, Dragon Lord believes that this boy could become a good doctor in the future. What do you think, Iron Buddies?